Good afternoon. I'm Judy Fox, the arbiter organizer of this conversation, which we hope will be useful, at best, interesting at least. And in that spirit, I hope that everyone will ask questions, type in the questions along the way so that this can be a conversation rather than a Hydra kind of a multi-headed lecture. And the three of us, Lucy Flint and Laura McDonald, and I can see each other, but we can't see you. So you can make all the funny faces you want, and we'll try not to. So this afternoon, our topic is the client and consultant relationships. And how this came about was my thinking that in order to do our jobs as curators, we're called upon to do tasks and have responsibilities that are way beyond what we might have studied in graduate school. We might be able to reattribute a Caravaggio drawing, but working with lawyers, engineers, graphic designers, conservators, shipping agents, editors, and so on is something that those kinds of tasks we are really need to look outside of ourselves. And for most of us, we're at institutions or have been at institutions that didn't have all these specialties in-house. And so in order to get our work done, we needed partnerships outside. So that was really the genesis of thinking, is how to make these partnerships productive. And oh, I just see something about a technical glitch. Am I supposed to stop? Keep going, it says. My apologies. Okay. And on the flip side of that, many of us, including myself, who has had years within a museum, have made the decision and found ourselves being one of those consultants, one of those outsiders hauled in by museums. And so there are two sides to every single thought that we will be talking about. Just by way of introduction, my own career began with 25 years within institutions, being institutionalized, I guess, as curator on staff. And then after a discombobulating, deaccessioning process of the staff at a museum, I found myself a curator without a museum, and wanting to continue this line of work, which I was devoted to, am devoted to. I had a couple of visiting curator appointments, the 1 year at Harvard, another 4 years at the University of Illinois, where I worked with Ginger Duggan. And when we came to the close of our 4 years there, Ginger said, do you want to just keep going, see if we can do this on our own? And so that was 10 years ago. So in thinking about whom to invite to join me, I could think of two names pop right to mind. Laura McDonald is a registrar, collections consultant, manager extraordinaire, with whom I had the pleasure of working at Tufts University Art Gallery, where she handled with grace and expediency an incredibly complicated organization that Ginger and I had organized, international, 5 stops on the tour. Many of the objects had hundreds of pieces tied together by little bits of monofilament. And I knew Laura was the person to bring into this because of her own moving back and forth from one side of the institutional wall to the other. And I hope you'll tell us about that, Laura, in just a moment. And Lucy Flint. And in full disclosure, Lucy and I were curators together for 14 years. And now, as we're both independent, we continue to work together whenever we possibly can. And Lucy, I hope that, why don't you just jump in right now and tell us about how your trajectory has gone from one side of the institutional wall to the other.
Yeah, I am an independent editor of contemporary art museum catalogs. It's a rather narrow niche, but it keeps me very repletely happy. When a new director came to the museum that Judy and I worked at, he naturally, understandably, sought to redefine the museum and to have that vision represented by new staff. So we were encouraged to to move on. And I thought at the time that I wanted to change my relationship to my own profession. I had been a curator for 15 years, but before that had worked independently on one project or another. And throughout all of those institutionalized years, I had edited my colleagues' writing for catalogs, and found that I really loved the relationship between words and images and objects, which there are some people who are more attracted to the nuance of language, and there are others who are drawn to the thing, the nonverbal expression of ideas and sensibility. And so it occurred to me that that could be an interesting hybrid role for me to play, to help other colleagues express themselves as truly and elegantly and persuasively as they could in the context of the book. And the book, of course, is going through all kinds of redefinitions now. And I have a theory, and I could be wrong, but I have a theory that the beautiful books, the books that are works of art themselves, are likely to persist because people have a kind of tactile relationship to the book. So I think that the acid-free paper, the paperbacks are going to go the way of much of contemporary reality, but the beautiful, ambitious book will survive. So that's it. My reputation was spread by word of mouth. I assume that organizations like the one that you all belong to is a place, kind of forum where you can exchange information on who you might want to work with in an editorial capacity. But for me, it was colleagues who I'd already known, people who had shared sensibility and values and priorities and standards, and those are the people with whom I've formed very long-lasting relationships, which are closer to an adjunct editor than a freelance person. Judy and I learned that freelance goes back to the Middle Ages, and it's a mercenary, basically. And I think that's something we're going to get into in this conversation about the relationship between work for hire and consultancy.
Thank you, Lucy. Laura, can you tell us about your having on institutional and independent hats at the same time, and how that came about and how you balance that?
Sure. Well, like Judy said, my name is Laura McDonald, and I've had the great fortune to have worked at some wonderful art museums. And I had a small child, of course, which changed my life back in 2001, at which point I sort of had to evolve into a different way of thinking about work. So I sort of started to take on a smaller schedule. When I came back from maternity leave, I was working, I think, about 3 days a week. And my husband was in the military, and so he went on deployment, which further complicated an already complex situation. And so it became important that I needed to be close to home, that I needed to have flexibility, that I needed to be able to take on work when I had the time, and I needed to not have myself beholden to work that I couldn't keep up with when I didn't have the time. It gave me the utmost freedom. So during the time that I was freelancing, I also had a job at a museum that I worked at 2 days a week, and then I would fill the other 3 days as needed with freelance work, working for other institutions. I did a lot of networking. I met a lot of great people. A lot of the work that I did was processing, incoming collections. I would go to offsite storage facilities where the collections were received, catalog, photograph. It was in some cases solitary work, but it could be done on my own schedule. I managed a lot of traveling exhibits, which again could be done sometimes. Checklists can be done at 2 o'clock in the morning or over Christmas vacation. And I, occasionally had to travel for those exhibits so that I could see them installed and moving from place to place. I found it immensely rewarding. And I think partly, it is owning it's owning a business. You have to be, it's not necessarily just being a consultant. You have to be looking at it like this is my small business. And I came from 2 parents, each of whom were business owners, who encouraged me heartily along the way. And they were great resources to me. And I found it immensely rewarding, and had a kind of a hard time going back into working at a full-time job, but eventually the health benefits and all that kind of won out, and here I am now full-time at Tufts University, where I hire people just like me.
So one of the questions that all of us have, regardless of which side of the institutional wall we're on, is how to make the relationship productive, how to establish goals, how to sense the cultures within the institution, and how to meld them with a personal working style. And I wonder if either of you would like to pick up this kind of train of thought and run with it for a little bit.
Yeah, I find that it's one of the greatest challenges about working freelance is that you've got to get to know the team that you're working with very quickly and very indirectly. Indirectly. I mean, it's, for me, I think that and you can say more about this, Judy, but I think that for curators, you normally go to meet the director or the curatorial colleagues, and you meet the entire staff that you're going to be working with, registration and development. And but for the editor, it's really sort of inserting yourself into the brain of the writer or contributor, and for many people, it's a very intimate intellectual act to be in, sort of having the audacity to step into someone's way of thinking. And I can suggest a word just to avoid, say, the repetition of diction. And the author can say, I would never use a word like that. And of course, I don't know that because I don't know them. So I think that you've got to build a real relationship of trust. And I'm sure this is true for both of you too, that you've got relationship building is as much of the work as the work itself. Conversely, you're sort of exempted from the work of meetings and institutional structure and negotiation with colleagues within the institution. So in a way, it's very streamlined, that it's just the work itself.
Well, when I remember learning the value of a contract. that any relationship that you want to end well has to start with a detailed contract of what they're expecting from me, so that I can have an opportunity to say, no, maybe I can't meet that need, or I'm going to need help on this, or the timeline isn't going to work for me. And having as much information in that contract, so I have as well-rounded as an idea of what they're expecting from me. I always felt like that was the best thing going in. It was a little bit comforting, so that I could have it all written out, refer to it from time to time. And then from there, you know, I became sort of at times enmeshed with the staff members who were working with me or who were supervising projects that I was working on. And I think that it kept it, I think kind of knowing up front as much as I tried to know, kind of kept those relationships good, and in many cases kept me going back to the same institutions for other projects later on, that they came to understand how I worked and I understood how they worked.
This question of a contract, I've had the experience that at the beginning of a relationship with a museum, it's a lovely honeymoon and we're all excited and it's a wonderful new beginning. And then we get to the contract and somehow the tone changes. For me, it's important, and we work hard to get back to that optimistic and being on the same side situation. But all of a sudden, when there's a contract, yes, it's incredibly important. We don't do work without contracts or a letter of understanding. Mm-hmm. The scope of the project, how many catalogs do we get, when do we get paid, what benchmarks, and all that kind of thing. But it always seems like it's kind of a tense shifting from this beginning wooing and each other, and then this kind of laying it all down. And have either of you had that kind of situation? Do you have words of wisdom on how to keep the whole negotiation on a positive note and then restore any kind of the collaborative feeling that began the project?
Well, I've had some experience with that. I feel like I've, in many cases, I think in many ways, I am a very practical person. So the transition from the sort of beginning of an idea that you know, I've clearly by that point gone in and spoken to people about, that's, you know, let's have an exhibit and it's going to be this, and would you serve as a contract registrar for, you know, in some cases 2 years or 3 years. You know, a lot of life happens over that amount of time and things evolve. And so sort of getting to the practical side of it, I always felt like for me, that was where I actually was more comfortable, was in the practical laying out of the plan. And a lot of times the things that were awkward for me were saying, this timeline that you've written up, it's not feasible for one person to do condition reports on, you know, 100 antique posters and get it done in 2 days. It's just simply not going to happen. And so kind of working back from what their expectations are and from what I felt my standards were, that I had to be able to reach my own standard that was going to feel comfortable and also meet what they needed. And those negotiations, yeah, they could get tense. But in the end, I think you have to dig in and make sure that the product that you are giving them is something that you can be confident in, that you can do, and that they will understand why it has to take that long, or whatever the issue is.
Lucy, you work in kind of a different way, as I understand it.
Yeah, I charge an hourly fee, and there are. I know that this presents difficulties for museums because it's absolutely unpredictable how long interactions with authors are going to take. You have a major museum catalog, and there might be, 6 contributors, and one of them may be reflecting a style or culture that is going to, if you have to choreograph the essays so that there is variety and cohesion simultaneously, and that can be quite intricate, not just a matter of Americanizing language or introducing the serial comma, but the voices that each of those authors brings to the catalog have to be conversant. And there are times, I had one occasion when, and I like to work with people for whom English is a second language, but who are every bit as smart and critical and thoughtful as their English-speaking counterpart. But that can be if they take language very seriously, and you have the veil of translation, so to speak, interceding between you, it can take a long time to get to a point where that author is really satisfied that they are being represented in the way they want to be. And that is absolutely unpredictable. You can't judge that from writing that you've seen published by them.
So do you try to have check-in points with let's say the organizing curator or if you realize that things are taking a lot longer, do you say, wait a minute, we're in a situation than we had thought?
Yeah, that's absolutely my responsibility to do that. And the curator usually will go back to the authorities in her or his institution and see whether we can exceed what the original estimate was. I usually try to provide a ballpark figure based on, in some ways it's just based on intuition. I can't do a per word, which is what some editors do, but I have found that to be absurd. But at the same time, the institution has budgetary responsibilities of its own, and there have been times when I've had to eat it, so to speak.
I don't see any questions typing into the little secret box that I have on my screen, and we would really love to have any kind of comments or your experiences. I ask our 4 participants out there to feel free to push this conversation in whatever direction would be useful for you. But I think that this open communication, this overarching trust, these seem to be 2 of the major themes that are coming out, and certainly have defined the kind of work that Ginger and I do, the kind of successful, and I think all the projects that we've done I would call successful. We've gone on to have many, many repeat museums we've worked with, and I think that's, I know that you, Lucy, have repeat museums you work with. Laura, in your independent work, I'm sure there were museums that came back to you happy with the first time around.
Yes, many of them. And actually, interestingly enough, that's one of the things that I was most surprised about, was that I wound up being sort of a standby person for, I don't know, 2 or 3 institutions, and one project would end and the next one would start. for me, it was great. It meant that I wasn't always going out looking for new clients, but that I had sort of a certain rapport with the existing clients that meant that I would get other opportunities for the next project, which was fantastic. And I think that, you know, anytime you can keep a customer, essentially, you know, as they say, it's better than going out and finding new customers.
And that's
it's a little different for me in that the service that I provide varies so much from individual to individual that it isn't. It's a matter of, as I said earlier, about kind of determining what the other person's outlook is, and whether or not we're compatible as a result of that is how much rapport is there at an ideological and intellectual level. So it's a little bit different from some. Very infrequently, I've had an author say, "You've just, you know, divested me of my voice, and that's the worst thing I can possibly hear." And I say, "Well, we must work to restore it." But most of the time, it's this wonderful kind of dynamic symbiosis where you're making something together rather than providing a service. So it's just a little bit different, I think, different kind of service.
I think that brings up this whole question of whether you're thought of as an employee or a consultant or a contractor. This kind of, there's always a power relationship between, well, going in both directions. The independent contractor can walk away from a situation, and yet the independent contractor needs the institution to pay the bills and the tuition and the healthcare and all that. So it's this kind of balance of power is always at play, with the kind of shaped by the attitude, I think, whether the outsider is thought of as a contractor or a consultant. Different meanings of those kinds of words.
I always felt like that there was always this awkward moment that would happen when I think that at a job I was working on, there would be some sort of discussion about some subset of the project, and that you know, can you do it in the next 2 days or something? And I would awkwardly have to say, well, I'm working at a different institution, and I'm trying to keep all of these balls in the air to the extent that I need to. But those were always the moments where I felt like I was the outsider. That a lot of times, you know, I could sort of fold myself in with the staff and become very comfortable and understanding of what the project was about and my part in it and my relationship to these other people. But when it came time to my own time and having to maintain relationships with other current clients, I always felt like that was when it got a little bit awkward, and I had to say, I'm not an employee and I have different needs.
Laura, we have a question for you. If you could share how you would go about looking for new possible situations for people to hire you. Yes, there's repeats, but if you have other strategies that you use.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I did, I sort of, every time I went to museum conferences, I would kind of make it my business to know people who were at other institutions similar to those that I had worked at, kind of because I think I naturally felt like I knew what their needs were to some extent. I also at that time was sort of working in a variety of ways. I was doing registration, but I also did installations, and I would work on installation projects. And I tried to be as open as I could about what my skills were and what I could bring. And in some cases, I was hired to work on traveling exhibits simply because I could both do the registration and install when it got to the new venue. And I would spend a week alone installing the exhibit. So kind of having, I think, as wide a possible range of services that you could possibly offer people, so that even after the end, when I wasn't doing so much installation anymore, but I was rather doing mostly registration, I had started with those institutions as an installer. And so I think that kind of going out and meeting people at whatever opportunity you have to meet, making sure that you know who else is working there, if you have contacts, getting in there on sometimes small projects, because sometimes the small projects down the road lead to bigger projects and bigger opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Judy, why don't you say something about your experience in that, in that regard?
It doesn't seem like there's any real organized way. I think good work hopefully begets good work. Sometimes we organize an exhibition, it goes on a tour, and then one of the participating museums in the tour then contacts us and wants to originate something with us. And that's always a very nice sequence of things. We've already demonstrated and shown what we do, we make lots of kind of cold calls, cold emails. If we think that an idea that we have is particularly suited to an institution, we aren't shy about sending an email to the curator or director to present the idea. And I have to say that we've been doing this for 10 years, and I don't get as nervous as I used to, but when there's a lull, when we don't have enough projects, we like to have 2 or 3 out ahead of us. I feel like we're washed up. This is it. It's all over. And then, what do you know? The phone rings. Hasn't been the Tate yet, but that's okay. We love the museums we work with. So I don't have any kind of real prescription for how we do this, but it's ongoing relationships. It's a field that's pretty small, so the word gets around, and that's one of the many reasons why it's really important to do the best work you possibly can and not screw up, because everybody will know that you do good work, and they'll know if you screw up. So that's important. I don't know if that answers or is useful, but right now the 2 projects we have ahead of us, both opening in 2019, one is with a repeat museum, Pratt Institute in New York. We did a big project with them, which is just finishing up its 4 or 5 tour, 4 or 5 venue tour, and we have a new project opening that will open in about a year with them. The other project ahead of us is with the Berman Museum at Ursinus College. I'd never heard of Ursinus College before. We got a phone call from their director, and we're very excited about that project. Excited to have a new institution to work with, and how that came about, I don't really know.
It's interesting, Laura, you were talking about, having to kind of be a jack of all trades and go beyond your strict definition. And I too, through this one person telling another person about what I do, is I have a sideline now of academic publications, and they're very different. An academic book is very different from a museum catalog, and you feel in some ways that you just aren't getting the training you need, the reminders you need, the training, the technological, you don't have an IT department who can solve your word processing questions. So there's a lot of sort of learning as you go along, I think.
I think that's the worst thing about working independently. There's no IT to call, and so
Yeah.
I can ask my son-in-law to help me out with.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, you know, I think that for me, what I realized quickly was that, you know, I could go into these museums or these galleries and think I'm a pretty organized person and I can, you know, manage objects and databases and spreadsheets and, you know, condition reports. And what was hard for me was managing my receipts for travel, and you know, so the interesting thing was learning that I had to apply those same kinds of skills to just being a small business owner. You know, managing clients and having, you know, contact lists and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it was that was an interesting lesson to learn.
But Laura, what I find interesting is that things that one does as the so-called small business owner, that if I were on staff somewhere as curator and someone asked me to update a mailing list, you know, here I am many years down into this field, I would rankle at that. I would want my intern to do it, but it's my mailing list now, and it's sending out my or our, with my partner Ginger, sending out announcements of our projects. It's our website. I want every single date to be correct on that website, and I keep it up to date. But if I were, you know, back at one of the museums I had been on staff with, and at this point in my career, someone had asked me to check the website and make sure all the dates were up to date, I would have been insulted. And now I'm right in there, and I learned how to do it, and I do it, and I want it to be done.
But that is also something that is happening culture-wide. I think that even within museums, that the hierarchies are flattening more, and you aren't necessarily expected to have a you know, secretary who's there to do the kinds of things that a curator doesn't want to be concerning him or herself about. I mean, I think that's a sort of national cultural shift to greater autonomy and equality, really.
Yeah, I think you're right, Lucy. I think that's and as you know, at the kinds of museums that we were at for such a long time, academic museums, the backup, we didn't have assistants. We had students, and they were wonderful. And the great benefit of the student relationship is that then they grow up and they become colleagues, and I've always loved that.
Yeah.
The mentees become mentors.
That's right. Yeah.
I've actually been hired as a freelance consultant, working for an institution, and was called by a student who had been someone who had worked for me. She said, "Guess what? I need a contract registrar. Would you do it?" And I said, "Of course."
Well, that's what we want to have happen. You know, that's part of the, I think, the responsibility of being moving along in a profession is to bring others, share what you know, and hopefully they're going to do better work than we do.
Yeah.
If things are going to move.
I have that experience too with my, usually my liaison at, there's an institutional liaison who's a junior person who's, a lot of the conversation goes through that person who is from all these decades of experience that I now have, that there ends up being a kind of teaching opportunity there that's very gratifying.
And that, just circling back around to the whole relationship with an institution, clarifying on the front end, and this is more of a logistical kind of point, on how you're going to get the work done is an important thing. In some cases, we've had the situation that you described, that there's one person within an institution. We talk only to that person, who then disseminates the questions, issues, and then, but more usually, we are just inserted seamlessly into the staff. And so we work directly with education, with PR, with development, and we aren't going through someone. But either way can work very well. It's just important to know how the institution wants to structure having this, I was going to say interloper, but I would like to say new friend instead.
Well, one of the things that I've found in many cases, since I have worked at institutions that were educational institutions that had museums or galleries and were traveling exhibits, what I always found interesting was that the standard vendor contract that I was asked to sign, and which I now give to people who come in to work here at the gallery with me, was written up for people who are doing a range of projects or work for the university that can include anything from taking down trees to putting up fences to performing registration in the gallery to, you know, whatever else. And sometimes, you know, a one-size-fits-all, although nice for the legal team at these institutions, sometimes didn't fit what I was doing or what I was working on. And, you know, we would have to go into some great, some modifications of the contracts, and still do today here at Tufts, where our contracts specify things that in most cases freelance workers in the museum field simply can't provide. You know, we can't hire outside installers who are 24-year-old kids out of art school. We need them to build walls and hang art on the walls. And in most cases, those students or those young people come and they do not have fine art insurance, you know, and the university says you're required to have, you know, insurance. No one's going to insure a 24-year-old kid to hang a $1 million piece of art. So it's funny how, you know, kind of being on both sides of that at this point, you know, learning that the best contracts I've signed or had to work with were for institutions that understood that a museum requires a different kind of language and a different kind of, you know, layout of what that contract is going to look like and what the expectations are and what's reasonable to expect from someone who's making, you know, working for 3 weeks on a project. So
we were required by Wesleyan University to be insured, and for a curator to get insurance, we didn't really know where to begin and what we were being insured about, whether our essay was good enough or I don't know, but the closest thing we could find was being an interior decorator. And so we didn't hang the drapes, but we selected them and showed where they would go. I guess that was the rationale, but it was, again, one of these institutional requirements that was meaningless and peculiar. Luckily, being an interior decorator doesn't cost all that much insurance-wise, it turns out. The stakes aren't that high. Yeah. Well, I see that we're moving into sort of the last quadrant of this conversation, and I'd like to hope that maybe Zandra and Susanna, Bart, Zama, that you might have comments, thoughts, experiences to share, tips for us, questions. We're at your disposal. We're yours. Watch my little box to see if anybody types anything. Expectantly, I will watch.
It's like that, the moment at the end of the lecture.
Yeah. Please, won't there be a question? Yeah. I should have a little soundtrack music, but I'm going to look to see if I can come up with some other questions to share with you guys. in case, yeah. Let's see. So I'm wondering, as a question for our audience or participants out there, what you find are the benefits of working with outside consultants, freelancers, and how you go about making these decisions on whom you're going to hire, what you're looking for, an ongoing relationships, repeat clients, new fresh blood, new point of view.
Well, I can speak to that. We have several freelance people that I use regularly. They're in a way very much like I used to work. We are currently working with a contract registrar here. We also have a fine art photographer that we work with on a regular basis, who's kind of become part of the fabric of our world here. And I think that both of these people bring something that's valuable to me, which is that I don't need to train them. They are coming there, as opposed to students who are oftentimes what we get as helpers here. We get graduate assistants, or if we had a full-time staff, a new staff member. These people are different. They come, they're packaged and ready to work, and all you have to do is give them the workspace and give them the tools that they need, and they can work without so much it's not a mentoring relationship the way I'm also often required to be in here with student workers. This is a person who can get right down to whatever the project is. In the case of the contract registrar, coming in and standardizing all of the terminology in our database, which, had I had the time, I would love to do, but haven't had the time to do it. And she has been wonderful at it. And the fact that she can then also make suggestions to me. She's coming in and she's working at a pretty high level of museum registration, and can say, what would make your website or your database work better is this. And learning from these people is, an enormous boon to what I do and what we do. And just watching a fine art photographer, over the years, now I feel like I could probably, if I had to, set some lights. I could find the glares. I could, and they're wonderful. They're people that have become such kind of regulars that we consider them, that they come to our Christmas party.
And you don't have to pay them any benefits.
And when they're done, right now our contract registrar has 1 day left. We'll have a big party for her, a big send off, and then she'll be gone, and she's going to come back for a week in the summer. So kind of good to have them around when we need them, and they bring a high level of expertise and require no hand holding. I have found that they like to have a permanent workstation. Nobody wants to move every time they come.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the hallmarks of the very most satisfying kind of relationship to have, let's say, from the freelancer's point of view with the institution, and then maybe our institutional partners on the other side of this 3-4-walled, whatever it is, might want to speak to this from their point of view.
Yeah, I really would love to hear what Laura's spoken to this, but this is it a cost saving measure primarily, or is it diversifying the voice in which you're speaking as an institution? What are the motivations for institutions to contract work?
Well, I think we contract work when we need, especially on a project-based kind of basis when we have too much work that needs to happen and we don't have enough staff, because we keep a very small, tight staff here, and we just simply don't have the budget to bring on new people. So having contract workers out there that are really professional, good to work with, and can help us and come in a pinch are wonderful.
We find ourselves working mainly with university museums, college museums, and art schools where there is an ambition for a challenging and brisk exhibition schedule, and maybe no curator on staff, or if there is a curator, certainly filling the program with one curator isn't a possibility, and so we're brought in that kind of situation. And what we found is, in some cases, a museum, a college museum, university museum might not have any curator, and so guest curators would, freelancers, be brought in, and then a new director comes in and hires a curator, and that's the end of our relationship with them, but it's the right thing for that institution at that time. And just at that time, another museum will have decided to get rid of their curator or move to a new model. And that's just what happened after maybe 5 or more years working with Wesleyan University. A new director came and hired a curator, and that's just wonderful for them. And at the same time, then the Berman Museum decided they'd go to this new model. So it's as these institutions shift their ways of working that the need for the kinds of work that we do comes in and out of focus.
Yeah, and that certainly happens with, I think publication departments are getting fewer and fewer as books are more expensive to produce, and it's harder and harder to find people to buy books. So most, but there are a lot of people who are still very committed to the book, and I think that is a way that institutions can honor the book and the hard copy while being able to afford to produce them.
We're just delighted when we have the opportunity to publish something with an institution. It isn't a given. Many of the projects that we do, or maybe many don't have a publication as do have a publication. So we're always delighted when we have that opportunity. It makes the scope of our project richer, deeper, more work for us in the very best way.
Well, and you work with some really interesting and adventuresome graphic designers, and who are another army of independent people who it's not that dissimilar from art making.
Yeah, and that's always a part of the project, both working with the graphic designers, but also we work with exhibition designers. Some of the exhibitions that we do, I think, might look like a yard sale if they didn't have the right kind of exhibition design that brings the objects into context and harmony with each other. And I find those kinds of relationships incredibly exciting, and when done right, which usually is our experience, luckily, really satisfied as well.
Yeah, and people have gotten so used to communicating electronically that those sorts of virtual teams are easy to maintain and assemble and maintain.
Well, the kind of relationship that Ginger Duggan and I have, both living, 2,000 miles apart, we're in the same time zone. That's a nice thing, both on the East Coast, but we see each other 3 times a year at an art fair, at an exhibition opening, but we send each other countless emails a day. We don't even talk on the phone very much, oddly enough.
Yeah, well, there's a dematerialization of culture going on throughout, and art objects, of course, are reflecting that. But perhaps it'll also be the beginning of a pendulum switch to longing for things.
Well, I think we certainly see that in the number of DIY projects and craft shops and community art courses being offered in all kinds of crafts. You know, we need stuff. We like stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm trying to think of what a good way to wind this up would be to be helpful, useful. I guess in perhaps in summation, we those of us inside and those of us outside, it's always maintaining standards. It's always having an open and trusting relationship. I think maybe it's no different than living a life and working with each other and doing the best we possibly can.
Well, this has been fun just to hear from Judy and from Lucy.
Oh, no, it's been a real pleasure.
We never had much time to chat, did we, Laura, with Lucy and Jorge Orta show, and we were inundated with stuffed toys and cooking utensils.
That was a wonderful exhibit, though. That was that was a once in a lifetime. I'll never work on anything like that again. You know, the thousands of objects and looking at a battered you know, World War II canteen with bullet holes in it and say, how do you condition report?
I saw that show in London, Ontario.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
And I just heard from the curator at the Johnson Museum at Cornell, where the exhibition traveled, Andrea Iselman, that they have just acquired a work by Lucy and Jorge Orta that's part of one of the series that we showed. And so that was very exciting to hear.
That's exciting.
Exhibition has
lived on
in this way. Well, I think that maybe we're coming to the close of this hour, and I'd like to thank you all, Lucy and Laura and AAMC and our participants out there, and Hannah, who has been patient putting this all together, making sure that we don't do something terribly wrong. I hope we haven't. And so if you'd like to be in touch with any of us individually, please do approach us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for organizing this, Judy. This was wonderful.
Yeah, I know. Another virtual team.
Yes, well, thank you both.
Yeah, you bet.
It was fun. All right. Bye, everyone.